Good evening. I would like to acknowledge Torah Anytime, the beautiful Kiddush Hashem that they make worldwide, and that they are able to reach so many homes, so many people in bringing the Divrei Torah from so many Talmidei Chachamim, so many people participate, and I just began an association with them, and I am amazed at seeing how many homes are affected by their efforts and their work, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give them the ability to be able to uplift and to encourage so many who participate in their broadcast. This week's Parsha is Parshas Shoftim, and there are Kadmonim who speak about the fact that almost always the first Shabbos of Elul is Parshas Shoftim, and the pasuk opens with Shoftim v'shoitrim titen l'cho b'chol she'arecha, that you should put judges and police enforcement, law and order in all of your gateways and wherever you live. And the Kadmonim touched that Sha'arim, gateways, are the ears, are the eyes, the nose, the mouth, where we are able to accomplish a lot. We see a lot, we hear a lot, we listen, we speak, but we have to put the admonishment is that when you come to Elul, we have to begin looking at ourselves, not at others. We have to begin with Shoftim, judging. What are we saying? What are we listening to? What are we looking at? And we have to put some enforcement, shoitrim, like a police force, to ensure that the beautiful gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, such as eyesight and being able to hear and be able to express ourselves with our mouths, with our voices, that it's a gateway, and we have to make sure that it is with proper machshava, dibur, and maisa. And that reminder and that admonition comes at the beginning of Elul, when we begin the 53-day process from the beginning of Elul straight into Isru Chag of Sukkos, after we set the pathway for our year's destiny. I told you about Chamisha Asar B'Av, that's the springboard for all of these Yomim Tovim, because Elul in and of itself is a month that was gained by Yaakov Avinu's fight with Esav, the Sarshal Esav. One of the things that each one took 3. Yaakov Avinu took Nisan, Iyar, and Sivan, and Esav grabbed the next 3, Tammuz, Av, and Elul. And it was Yaakov Avinu knew that before Mashiach we always have to throw a bone to the Samach Mem, to the Yetzer Hara. That's why we have hairs on the tefillin. That's a bone to the Samach Mem. We wash Mayim Achroinim, a bone to the Samach Mem. And everything that we do before the Geula Shlema is a balancing act of being able to survive in this world with the power of the Yetzer Hara being so strong. And occasionally there are things that we do to pacify him, such as I just said, the Mayim Achroinim and the hairs on the tefillin. But what bothered Yaakov Avinu was the question of Elul, that he couldn't let Esav have the month of Elul and to lose out the month of preparation to come into Rosh Hashanah, and they fought about it. And at the end, Yaakov Avinu, as the Arizal alludes in the Pasuk Aromimcha Hashem Ki Di Lisoni Al Pi Kabbalah, is a reference of Yaakov Avinu's statement about his acquiring from taking back the month of Elul to be under the hashpah of Klal Yisrael. And Elul in and of itself, it's not just hachana, it's a refining plateau which we engage in each and every hour of the day, of each and every day and each and every week. The Shabbosos that condition ourselves with listening to the Tekiah Shofar, beginning the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, and saying L'David Hashem Ori V'Yishi, that permeates and it etches itself into the very fiber and being of the person and his neshama by saying it in those days and listening to the shofar, even though Tekiah Shofar is not a mitzvah. The mitzvah of Tekiah Shofar that serves as the absolute elevation of Klal Yisrael into a realm that is unbelievable is Rosh Hashanah. But there is, by doing the minig of hearing the shofar each and every day of Elul, it does serve its purpose, and it's a moment of refinement. Now, we know that Shoftim has in it the inyan of Melech Yisrael. Now, the Melech Yisrael was told, as the Psukim say, Lo Yarbe Lo Noshim, and also he shouldn't have many wives, and he shouldn't have many horses, because the bedrock and the place of merchandising excellent horses was Mitzrayim, was Egypt. And rather than going back to Mitzrayim, if he had a taste and was a connoisseur for fine groupings of horses, it could lead him to go back to Mitzrayim. And we had at Tziva, which is a discussion in and of itself about going to Mitzrayim, if it meant only to live in Mitzrayim, or it means to be able to have the power of what the Melech could do as the leader. And the Melech, in many respects, superseded the Kohen Gadol, because we know that a Melech took a haircut, for instance, every single day. But the Kohen Gadol took just once a week. The Kohen Gadol took once a week. And there were other restrictions that, for instance, if somebody insulted the Melech shemochel al kavodo, ein kavodo mochel, that he couldn't say, okay, you insulted me in front of everyone, I'm moichel you, it's no problem. He couldn't do that, because it was the stature and the prominence of the office of Melech that commanded a higher level of actual obedience, royalty, respect. And a Rav, Shemochel al Kvoda, if someone insulted his Rebbe, then the halach is, and the Rebbe was Moichel, Kvodo Mochel. In other words, he had the power to say, I Moichel you, but even the Melech himself could not say, I forgive you. So there are two things that we are told in the Parsha that the Melech could not do. Now, Shlomo HaMelech, who was the wisest of all. And in his 40 years being Melech, he was 12 when he became Melech, and he was Nifter at age 52, that Shlomo Melech said, I am going to have more than 18 wives. According to most opinions, he had 1,000 wives. And he had a grouping of horses which was much more than what the Torah said, because he made a statement that I will be able to ani arbe v'lo osur, I will not turn away even if I have, because I know how to master my mind and my attitude, and I will be able to do the proper thing even with more wives and even with many horses. Now we know that he stumbled on both things, that the many wives caused him trouble in his level of ruchnius. So these are two things that the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Shlomo HaMelech did, and thought that he could override and be within the umbrella of what the Torah demands and still do it. And he tripped. So the Gemara says these are the two things that the reason of why not to do it is in the Torah. It says you shouldn't go astray, they'll lead you elsewhere. So the Chidushei Harim asked and said at the very, what do you mean? The Gemara says two things. The very beginning of our parsha says that lo sikach shoichad, and it gives the reason. Ki ha-shoichad ya'aver einei chachamim v'salef divrei tzadikim. So why didn't Shlomo Melech do that? Take bribes also, because he felt that he could supersede the problems of limitation of wives and horses. So why didn't he take the bribery also? So the Chidushei Harim says, because in the pasuk it says that the reason not to take a bribe is ki hashoichad ya'aver einei chachomim, because the rationale that Shlomo HaMelech had was he could do those things because he was a chacham and knew the mastery of mind to be able to avoid the pitfalls. But over here where the Torah says openly it's going to cause the estrangement of the judgment of the judge, because even chachamim will trip. So then Shlomo Melech said, I thought I could outsmart, so to speak, the other two things. And at the end he fell in. But over there he didn't even try, because that the pasuk says and talks about chachamim. It didn't say chachamim over there, so he thought his chachma could keep him within the realm. But over here where it openly says that even the biggest chachamim, if you take the bribe, is going to cause you to be blinded in your judgment and to be led astray. Now, right towards the beginning of our parsha, it says that V'kamta v'yalis el hamakom asher yivchar Hashem, and it says that v'shamarta lasos kachol asher yerucha, that when you have to go ask a shaila, and you have to go to the chachamim who are there, because we know that many people say, these rabbonim, where do they come to Reb Moshe and to Reb Aaron and to Rav Yaakov and to the tzaddikim, the Hasidic Rebbeim? We're like a Dor Yosem. So why do I have to really listen to them? So the pasuk says, Asher yiyeh bayomim ahem, that each and every generation has their leadership, and it has to be listened to, respected, and responded to. Asher yiyeh bayom, even in your generation, and even if you're 80 years old and you remembered tzaddikim gemurim, that there's no one around like these at that level, you have to, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends rabbanim and leaders, and we have to listen to them. That's what the pasuk says. Now, we know that in Shulchan Aruch it paskins that if someone leaves out water or wine or milk, the Shulchan Aruch paskins leaves it overnight out, you should not drink it if it's not covered. And the reason given in Shulchan Aruch is because we are choishish that there was some sort of snake who wanted to drink from one of these liquids, and while drinking would put its own poison into the liquid. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, if it's left overnight and it's uncovered, don't drink it. And then the Shulchan Aruch says that, but today that we really don't have snakes crawling around us, you could drink it. So that is the halacha. But the Vilna Gaon, who lived like 150, 175 years after the Shulchan Aruch was written, he told his Talmidim and his family, if they ever leave out the water or milk or wine, that they should never in the morning drink it. And he explained, and he said, because even though the Shulchan Aruch gave us a reason why not to drink it, and then explained that that chashash is not prevalent today, but nevertheless we know that Shulchan Aruch halachas minhagim, they are not geometry. In other words, geometry is a chachma, and on the face you can learn it, you can delve into it and come up with theories and different things, but it's not the level lahavdil of Torah. And when the Chachamim established the halacha, it was with their Ruach HaKodesh, it was with their power of Baskol, which is higher than Ruach HaKodesh, and it was accompanied by Remez, Drush, and Sod. That means there were many things, said the Vilna Gaon, that beyond the surface of the simple meaning, the pshat, the halacha, and therefore they gave a reason, and if the reason wasn't applicable, the Shulchan Aruch says that you don't have to do it. But since there was dimension in their Ruach HaKodesh of everything they paskin, there was a deep mystical side to it, therefore, even though the reason was not applicable, but they should still refrain from drinking the water or drinking the wine or drinking the milk if it was left out. And that's what he told his Talmidim, to still be very careful. And the lesson to us is that when people sometimes stand back and say, well, why do we have to do this in Europe or in Russia, this and that prevailed? But we have to be sensitive to the deeper things that does not meet the eye. And that's why the Gemara says that if there's a debate in the Gemara about what the halacha is it like this mandiyam or that mandiyam, that quite often the Gemara will say they do not arrive at a conclusion. And the Gemara says, just go out on the street and see how Klal Yisrael are behaving. Learn from the Hanhag of Klal Yisrael, because they've been drenched with centuries of hanhaga of how Klal Yisrael lives. And that is the biggest raya of what you have to do. Now the Gemara says, for instance, that we do not paskin halacha like Reb Meir. But the Gemara also says, and what's the reason that we don't paskin like Reb Meir? Because the Chachamim, his friends, were not able to understand L'sof Daito. That means he was so encompassed with brilliance and a level that even his Chaverim, who were all Tanoim, and I always say to you that a Tana could go into a cemetery, as the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says, and tell everyone to stand out of the graves. So they had that level, but they still couldn't understand the level of what Reb Meir was explaining and paskening. So therefore they didn't pasken, because the halacha is karab. Reb Meir, even if he was bigger, he was a yochid, he was one. And his chaverim were many. So they didn't pasken like him. But the Gemara says, in his edicts, his gezeras, we are noyig. Every gezerah that Reb Meir said, Klal Yisrael accepted. Why? Because gezeras and edicts don't need a reason or a rationale. But if we know he was so deep, he was speaking esoterically, he was speaking mystically, he was speaking at a level. So once you're in that realm, you had to listen to him, because he knew what he was talking about. You know, like Reb Meir paved the way. He was buried in Tveria, in his kever, we all know where it is, standing up. And he said he wanted to be buried standing up because when Tchias HaMesim comes, he doesn't have to want to take the extra 2 minutes to get up if he's in a straight lying down position. But he wants to be standing, that he could just run out of the kever and not waste even the 2 minutes. So there was many hanhagas of Reb Meir that the Chachamim respected and revered, but it was only the edicts, not the halachas, because the halachas they felt they had to understand, and they couldn't understand it. And that's why in the Sefer Torah of Reb Meir, the word kosnos or vayalbishem by Adam and Chava, that it is written that Hashem covered them with the skin to use as clothes, and kosnos, clothing, or with an ayin, as it's written, means skins. Vayalbishem, and he clothed them with it. But in the Sefer Torah of Reb Meir, it was kosnos or with an aleph. The Or HaGonos, the hidden light, because he lived his life at the level of all of his gezeros, and therefore when he laned in his Sefer Torah, even though the word or, which for all of us is with an ayin, with him it was an aleph, meaning the kosnos, the clothing of or, the magnificence of the Or HaGonos, the original light which was hidden in the Torah after Adam lost the benefit of enjoying the Or HaGonos because of the Aveira. So Adam Arishon lost it, and it was put away till Mashiach will come. And as I said to you, Chanukah, that the Ramban talks about it in Parshas Baaloscha, that when the menorah was lit by Aaron HaKohen, he brought back the Or HaGonos into the flame, so that on Chanukah every single Yid would be able to have the benefit of soaking and drenching his neshama with the Or HaGonos by looking at the Ner Chanukah. And that's what the Ramban says in Parshas Baaloscha, that Aaron HaKohen gave that gift and worked out the possibility for a Yid to enjoy the Or HaGanuz each and every year on Hanukkah, not Shabbos candles, but Hanukkah Lech. And that's why it says by Shabbos we don't have to sit, the wife or whoever lights the candles don't have to sit and watch it for 20 minutes or a half hour. But the halacha is that when you light Hanukkah Lech, you're supposed to sit there and absorb, just stare at the because you are drenching your neshama with the Or HaGanuz. And that's why the Sefer Torah of Reb Meir had the Aleph in it, and it was a kosher Sefer Torah because he was at that level. And for us, if we took a Sefer Torah and put it Kosnos Or with an Aleph, it would be a Puzzle Sefer Torah, but not for Reb Meir. So the power of listening to Chachamim and appreciating that they are enlightening the world, illuminating the world with levels that we do not always understand or see are above and beyond, and we have to be very careful, as the Vilna Gaon said to his Talmidim, not to dismiss anything with our simple understanding of our human limitations. Now, in our parsha, we have a parsha about the Kohen Mashuach Milchama. Who was it? He was a Kohen, and his position it was almost like a military chaplain, because before Klal Yisrael went out and waged war, they had to, the Kohen, Mashuach Milchama, had to go out and reassure the people that they should be confident and not to be afraid of going to Milchama, that they're going to win and they're going to be able to do what they have to do. And the Kohen Mashuach Milchama had that job, so it was very possible that his entire life, if Klal Yisrael did not go out to any Milchama, it could very well be that he didn't have what to do. He never exercised or executed his talents in terms of being a spiritual mentor and raising the level of the spirit of each and every Yid before they went out to war. Because if there was no war, he never spoke. And he was designated as a very, there were halachas that only he and the Kohen Gadol had, as the Rambam illuminates. But the Rambam says that in every case when there's Rabbanus or Chazonas, the son Yarshans, that means if there was a Kohen Gadol and he passed away, his son, as long as he was a Yerush Shamayim, he didn't have to be as big as his father, but he had the first right of filling the position. And that is the halacha for everyone, says the Rambam, in a position of leadership, a Rav of a shul, that his son should take over. But there's one exception, says the Rambam, and it's the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, because if the son was not able to imbue and instill a level of feeling secure and feeling the absolute backbone to go into the Milchama, so that he didn't serve the purpose. And that's the story with the Chofetz Chaim, that there was a Rav in a very prominent city and he died, and the Kehillah wanted to take a Rav who was an outstanding Talmud Chacham, but the family felt that the halacha is that the son, and this Rav left over a very fine son who was a Talmud Chacham and a wonderful. So they went to the Chavetz Chaim and asked a shaila. And the Chavetz Chaim paskin that even though the halacha is by Rabbanus that the son takes over, but in our day and age we're at war, and you need a Rav like a Kohen Mashuach Milchama who can reverberate and instill a tremendous spirit to the people. Because in those days of the Chavetz Chaim, who lived 90 years ago, rampant was the Haskalah. All of the isms, communism, socialism, fascism, all of these things were prevalent, and every Rav, said the Chavetz Chaim, is obligated to act as a Kohen Mashuach Milchama to reinforce the backbone and structure of each and every Yid's living, thinking process, and be able to stand up to all of these foreign winds that came their way and was destroying Klal Yisrael. As we know, so many fell into the sea of atheism and humanism and fascism who were Yidden. And many leaders in these different movements were Jews because they had the thinking process, and a lot of Jews followed them. So the Chavetz Chaim said that they have the right to take someone other for the Rabbanus than the son, because of the demand of the time. So, at the end of our Sedra, it describes what this Kohen Mashuach Milchama said. And he first said that Miho Ish Asher Bana Bayis V'lo Chanacho, that if someone built a house and he didn't inaugurate it, he didn't have the chance to move in, he should leave and go back home. Anyone who planted a vineyard and didn't have a chance to be able to give the netaravai and the arla and everything doing with it should go back home. Otherwise, someone else is going to do it for him, and he will reap no benefit from all his money that was invested and nothing, and all the effort that was put forth to bring about the successful fruition of this vineyard. And then the pasuk says that if someone married a woman and he didn't have time, he only did erison, but he didn't do any nisuin, he should leave the army and should not fight and should go back to his family. And then, fourthly, he said that somebody who is Hayore Virach Levov, that if he was afraid, then he should go back and not participate in the war. Now, Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara, in the Mishnah, says that that is the basic reason, that if someone really is afraid, because the other exemptions are items that are listed, but without the component of being, I mean, why should a person who just got married at 25, if there's a war that's worthy of engaging in, why shouldn't he be going? But Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees with Rabbi Akiva, and he says that it's only because of the Averas Shebiyado, the Averas that he did, that he doesn't have the schus to stand up against someone and take a bayonet or a sword or whatever they took and successfully win his private battle with this, because he has Averas on his list, and because of the Averas he's not going to be able to succeed. So those are two opinions. Now, Bais Shammai in the Mishnah says that Bais Shammai says that a person only divorces a wife if there was a dvar erva. That means for any nonsense, if they they were bickering or they were angry at each other, you can't just go and divorce a wife. If you found that she was not loyal and faithful to the husband, then you could divorce her. But Beis Hillel comes and says the opposite. He says that even if he didn't like the food that she cooked, he could divorce her. So that means that he's much more machmer. Usually we find Beis Shammai is the one that's machmer and severe in his approach. When there's a machloikis, usually Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, the one who's stricter and is gevura is Beis Shammai. And here Bais Shammai says only if she's not faithful, but for any other reason that you want to divorce, you can't divorce her. And Beis Hillel comes and throws the book Nebuch at a woman and says if he doesn't like your cooking, he doesn't like something in the kitchen, he can go and divorce you. That's a much more stringent. That means for the simplest of reasons, you can go and divorce somebody. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz had this discussion about these shitas and others, many others. I shouldn't limit it just to him, and say that Beis Hillel felt that if you did what Bais Shammai said, you only could divorce a woman if she was unfaithful, that woman would never be able to get remarried. Because let's say she got divorced, so people would talk a shidduch for and say, what? She was unfaithful. That was the only reason, according to Bais Shammai, she could get divorced. I don't want anything to do with somebody who's not a faithful wife. So Beis Hillel came and said different things that even if she got divorced because of a dvar erva, to give her a second chance. So a person wouldn't know. Maybe the husband didn't like the kugel. Maybe he didn't like the chont. And they got divorced. He couldn't write, and it would give the woman the opportunity to remarry and continue her life. So it came out that Beis Hillel really was the mako, like he usually is, because he was giving something to cover up a situation that the person shouldn't be doomed for eternity and stuck in a given posture. And so too Rabbi Yossi Aglili agreed that these things are reasons to go, but the main thing was because even if he was afraid of his Averas, we didn't want him to go back home and leave the army and go back to his house. Say, oh, this guy, Rabbi Akiva, was very strong, and said the only reason he can go home is if he's fearful, real fearful, and that's the reasons for all of these other things. But Rabbi Yossi Haglili came and said, you have to cover up for this man. Do you want him to be called a chicken and made fun of the rest of his life because his brethren stayed to wage war? And he came home, and it must be because he's afraid. So when this guy who had Averis, according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, but the Torah says other reasons, that was to cover up for the guy that had Averas, and that they shouldn't call him a shegitz when he comes home. That would have been the only reason allowing him to be there and to come home. Which teaches us really sensitivity, because a lot of people stumble in life, and some people do some very bad Averas, or they embarrass or they humiliate other human beings. They're really issues that the man should be ostracized and kept away from. But we have to see the side of compassion and give a person who tripped in life and made a mistake and was a baltaiva, or was busy constantly talking lashon hara about other people, give them a Pesach to be able to carry on with their lives, and it's not mute, it's not finished, and there's nothing to talk about. But it gives them an avenue, a vehicle of escape from what they did, to be able to continue with their tshuva and with their remorse, their lives in the community. Now, in the Sedra, it talks about Egla Arufa. We know that Egla Arufa is if suddenly a dead body is found between two cities. They don't know who killed him, they don't know. And the city has to really defend itself. We don't know. He didn't tell us he needs food, that we should accompany him. He was afraid to go on the way. They brought the whole Sanhedrin from Yerushalayim, not the local Bezdin, the main Sanhedrin, because the value of a life, not like New York, that we have 20 people killed every day, or Chicago, that a weekend means almost certain death in some communities for people, and that the value of life has cheapened in such a dramatic, terrible way. But here there was a dead body, it was the end of the world. And they summoned the Sanhedrin, had to stop whatever they were deciding and working on and adjudicating, and go to the two cities and to measure and to see and to discuss who's guilty here. And the city that was closest to the dead body ends up having to take an egla, a calf, and they chopped off the head. It was a whole to-do. And on this inyan, Kadmonim discussed the Gemara in Yuma that says that in the beginning, the Kohanim, it was first come, first serve. If they got to the Mizbeach first, they did what had to be done by the Mizbeach. But one time, there were two Kohanim running to get there first, and one took out a knife and stabbed the other. Gemara in Yuma says this. And the father of the victim who was killed came running and said, listen, my son should be a kapara for anything that was done wrong in the Bais Hamikdash, a kapara, and you should know, since he's still alive, the knife that he used to kill him is not tamei. So the Gemara goes into a whole discussion, because the Gemara says you made it sound as if the murder was nothing. You're worried about whether it's tahor or tamei, the knife. I mean, the discussion about the knife, a man was just killed, and the father was speaking in such terms that it seemed like a lack of sensitivity. I mean, here his son just got killed, and he should have been crying and screaming and everything, but he was talking about the kalim. So the Mefarshim explain that the Gemara was not going into stress that he was saying that the knife was tahor tamei. It was trying to underscore what is the intention of a man. When a man does something, we quite often come with a rationale to justify. We do something crazy, and then our mind goes into motion and says something to justify the action. It's nonsense. He should never have done what he did. He never should have said what he said. But he doesn't want to admit, and he doesn't want to look like a balavera. He doesn't want to look like a fool. So he comes up with rationales to fit the situation, to supposedly justify what actually happened. Over here, the way the Gemara discussed what the father was saying, that there was something either in the relationship or there was something in the story that was off base. And one of the in Sichas Musar of Reb Chaim, the Mir Rosh Yeshiva, he discusses this very story, and the pitfalls of people, of how deep and foolish they can veer from regular, clear admission or attention in a given situation. And that's why by Egla Arufa, a city will look for every reason in the book that they should not be the guilty city of the two. And we had to bring the Sanhedrin from Yerushalayim, who was totally removed, totally able to focus with their Ruach HaKodesh on what the emes is in the given situation and the circumstances. And that is what we have to be able to fine-tune each and every day of our lives as we speak and we act, to be able not to fool ourselves. Because that's really what rationale is. We're fooling ourselves, and sometimes you'll fool the people, many times you don't. They look at you like, what are you saying? You did it because of this and that, and you're just seeking to come out with clean hands. The Egla Arufa was a very important item in the backbone of Klal Yisrael in terms of attitude and rationalization. And that is the reason that Min HaShamayim they caused that when Yaakov Avinu was learning with Yosef HaTzadik before he left, and was sold to slavery and went through everything, and 12 years in jail, and everything that happened to him, Yaakov Avinu, the last thing that he learned with him was Egla Arufa. And the Rambam even paskins that from all the mitzvahs of, let's say, burying the dead, alvoyas hameis, bikur cholim, hachnosas kala, levoya, that when you escort someone after they were in your house. So the Rambam paskins beferish that the biggest mitzvah of all of them is levoya, escorting a person. And his Talmidim asked him, bigger than burying a dead body? No, it's a tremendous mitzvah to bury the dead. But the reason that I paskin that levoya is so important and supersedes all of them is because it's reinforcement of self-dignity and respect. And when somebody stands up and walks a block or walks down the stairs with a person, it's reinforcement of that self-respect and his worthiness as a human being. That's what the Rambam says. And that was what Yaakov Avinu wanted by learning with Yosef. Before he left to go find his brothers, he wanted to part. He didn't realize that it was going to be parting for all of those years. He thought he'd find the brothers and come back and tell them, how are they? What are they doing? But going out to find the brothers, because he used to speak Lashon Hara to Yaakov about them and say this and say that. So he wanted that the encounter should be sensitive. And that's why he learned with him Egla Arufa and then sent him out. That was the last thing that he learned with him, so that when he sees them, not to look in a negative way, but to find them and to learn from Egla Arufa how sensitive, that we didn't even trust the Bezdin of the local city. We sent out the Sanhedrin from Yerushalayim to go look and to decide what has to be done. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and now that we're in Chodesh Elul, Haba Aleinu L'Toiva, we're going to try to refine, pick on something that we can improve ourselves, and come into Rosh Hashanah with a resolve and resolution of being much better. Bracha v'hatzlacha.